This video is a book review about this book, Stupsi Explains the Tree. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it. This book is by Claus Mattheck, who is a really well-known biomechanics guy. I'll talk a little bit about what the book is like, how I feel about it generally, and whether I would recommend it. So the book is described as being something that explains the laws of trees in the language of a child. So this is the layout. You have a drawing done by the author, who is also a researcher. Then you have a photo of some example, and then you have text. So this text is the main part where you're learning stuff. Sometimes the drawings have information that's not in the text, so you do have to look at it all holistically. Each of these pages is technically its own little idea. There is some connection sometimes if he continues to explain a concept across multiple pages, but in a way it's not super organized because it's not streamlined where you go page by page and it builds up on each other. Sometimes it hops around. I think that these drawings of this hedgehog kind of character is actually super helpful. Sometimes the text is not super clear. It's the drawing itself that gives you a much better understanding of what he's trying to explain here. My feeling is that this is very digestible, obviously because with the drawings it's meant to be accessible, but if you don't have time, you can just read one section and just leave it at that. And in some ways I would actually recommend that because you can look into the concepts a little bit better. Some of these pages, a lot of them actually, have words that are not defined in a way that's helpful to arborists. It's not defined well within the book, and there are some terms that I'm not familiar with, but I think it might be a difference in terms of translation or how these things are described in Germany or in Europe. And it's just a matter of translation. I think the concepts should be similar. So it's a little bit hard for me to tell, even with my knowledge, how much of it is a concept that is completely new to me and how much of it is just the terminology. And you can see here I've marked a lot of pages with post-its. Some of these are things that I want to go back and review just to double check. Some of them are questions. Like in this page, it shares this shape and how it's formed, but it's not totally clear to me, so I want to go and look into it a little bit more. And sometimes they'll use terms that isn't defined yet in the texts, and then may or may not be defined later. Although this book says that it's for children, there's some areas where there is childlike verbiage, but this is definitely not for kids. Or at least maybe you could get a broad idea, but I found that you have to be a pretty decent arborist, not just someone who passed the exam and that was all they did. You have to be someone who's learning about biomechanics and to actually already know some of the body language of trees to get the most out of this book. There are terms that, like I said, don't get explained, and so adds to the confusion if you're really trying to learn from it. For example, there's a section where they use tangential, transverse, longitudinal. These are words that come up a lot when you're talking about wood anatomy, and I personally have difficulty I haven't gotten it to the point where I could explain it to someone, so I usually have to actively think about what these things mean, and the way that it's sort of used in the book could be a little bit confusing. That's my overview of this book. Right now, I looked it up. The place that I could find it that was more consistent was on Amazon for about $35. For a $35 book, I do think that this is worth it, but with some caveats. This is my second attempt at reading the book, and I did make it through, but for being such a small book, about 120 pages, it took me 3 sittings to get through this because I was trying to really understand it, and because the concepts are dense, then it wasn't something that I wanted to rush through because it's intended as a kid's book, and there is some language in there that feels infantilizing if you're looking at it as a resource as an arborist. I decided to actually read this book aloud, and that actually worked out really well. I was able to focus that way when I had issues with that in the past. I do think that it is a good introduction to biomechanics. I think some things are really detailed and some things are really simplified. So if this was my only resource, I'm not sure that I would feel comfortable presenting the information, let's say in written form, in reports. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that unless I read some other biomechanics stuff. But as far as explaining to homeowner clients, I think that this would be a good overview. Just make sure that you refresh your knowledge of wood anatomy, some basics of, branch structure, things like that before you get into it, or it's going to be a little bit overwhelming. The way that I see myself using this book in the future is to maybe periodically every X number of years, I can go through the entire book. If I'm reading other biomechanics books, like I have some of his other books, then I might come back and look at these tabs of areas that I'm not, that wasn't totally clear to me, and see if I understand it better now. I would put this not necessarily a consulting arborist book, but somewhere in between, like an arborist / consulting arborist book. I think some of his other books would qualify more for the level of detail and depth that you want to grow your arborist, your tree consulting knowledge.